And this shows both the deft diplomacy conducted by India, because India is in a very unique position, and very genuinely, India is friend of both the Western powers, of Russia as well as Ukraine. And India has always taken a very principled position that UN Charter should be followed, sovereignty of countries should not be violated, etc. But if one wants to move towards a resolution, towards a solution, then there is no point in using some acrimonious language. And earlier, before till yesterday, all the indications were that perhaps it may not be possible for all the 20 participants to agree to consensus paras, as we saw in all the meetings held in India in the last few months at the foreign ministers level, at the finance ministers level. It was not possible to have a consensus document because of these differences on how to frame the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So in that background, most of the analysts were rather pessimistic that there may not be a agreed fully consensus document containing all the issues, including the Ukraine issue. And now that we have this outcome, a consensus document, including a para not only on Ukraine but also on consequential issues like grain, shipments, etc. It's a very big achievement for India as a host, for Prime Minister Narendra Modi as the chief host, as the president of G20, Indian diplomats, and also a victory for all the other partners who sent their Sherpas, and they were fully participants in all these discussions.
Mr. Tyal, we've also seen that the G20 joint statement refers to the war in Ukraine and not to the war against Ukraine. And we also find that there is a significant shift if we see from the Bali Declaration last year. And External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, just a short while back, while he was talking to the media, he also pointed out that the Bali Declaration was reflective of the situation then, as the Delhi Declaration is reflective of the situation today. We also see that this G20 summit, the Chinese president and the Russian president were unable to attend. Do you feel that the absence of especially the Chinese president at the end of the day has not really made much of a difference, as the G20, as we have seen, it's been a huge success. The Delhi Declaration has been reached, and the G20 Sherpa from India also said that there was 100% consensus on it.
On your first question regarding para on Ukraine, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar is absolutely right. The situation is different. 1 year ago in Bali, it was different. And unfortunately, the positions have hardened on both sides. It is, in fact, much worse than what it was 1 year ago. And here I must say that both Russian side, as Foreign Minister Lavrov was here, as well as the Western side, which must have been led really by President Joe Biden. And I'm sure in yesterday's bilateral, this would have come up and a direction would have gone from President Biden to his Sherpa that come to some agreed compromise language, because this is really a question of honoring India as a host. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi, had there not been a consensus document, and it would have been the first time in the G20 meeting that there would not have been a consensus document, and it would have reflected a little poorly on India as a host. So, जिसको मान रखने वाली बात जिसको कहते हैं हम लोग, I think that was also done to accommodate all points of view and come to some agreement without being totally mulish and saying that we will not sign unless their language is accepted. Now, the second part of your question regarding the participation of President Xi Jinping is very important. Whenever such multilateral meetings take place and foreign leaders come to a host country, there are two parts of the activities. One is the bilateral agenda, bilateral part, and one is the multilateral part. Whatever the organization may be, they have their own agenda, like SCO or BRICS or the G20. Now, the way bilateral relations between India and China have been going and what transpired in Johannesburg just a few days back, when there was a very brief conversation between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, it was clear that India-China bilateral relations are frozen and there is no improvement expected. If we set that aside, then China did send their prime minister, who is a very important official, and China is the second largest economy of the world. China has responsibilities regarding the financial stability of the world, economic growth of the world, on issues like debt vulnerability, infrastructure. They have their own views, sometimes which are different than views of other members. But they played a constructive role, and in the press conference, our External Affairs Minister acknowledged that all 20 member countries, including China, played a constructive role, and that's why we see this very constructive, positive, forward-looking, and New Delhi Declaration adopted by consensus without any reservations from any member.
Ambassador Kyal, one another very important development which has taken place at this G20 summit is that the African Union has become a permanent member. And this is something that was in the talks for a long time. And India has taken a leading position on this. And India has also pushed the world, especially the Western world, to be more cognizant of the concerns of the global South. How much of this is a win for the African continent and also for India, which has been pushing for AU to be included as a permanent member in the G20?
Till now, Group G20 appeared to be a club of 20 largest economies of the world who were mostly discussing their own issues, their own concerns, and how to take the world economy forward or act against the pressures which are coming. But now, from day one, under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, the agenda of G20 has been enlarged, that the G20 meetings will not only talk about and address the concerns of the 20 members, but would also look into and take on board and address the concerns of the global South. In January itself, India had hosted a meeting of the Global South with 125 members. And now Africa Union has 54 members. Only one country from Africa, that is South Africa, is a member of G20. When we look at G20, we also notice that 19 are countries, nations, but 20th is European Union, which is a group of countries. So once there is scope for a group of countries like European Union to be a member, in the spirit of inclusive growth, in the spirit of G20 taking into account the concerns of the global South, it was India's suggestion, and I think it is India's huge success that African Union has been admitted as a member of G20. Not only admitted, but today itself, it was given a place at the high table as a member. I think it is a huge achievement. I would say that the day the meeting started with a great achievement of African Union becoming a member, and the day ended with the Prime Minister's announcement that consensus has been reached on New Delhi Declaration, because many of us were fearing that this may drag on till tomorrow and some conclusion may come only tomorrow, but this has all been wrapped up today. It's a huge success and very good news for the entire our country.
Ambassador Tyal, we've also seen that while the G20 summit is going on, we have seen a lot of diplomatic activity happening on the sidelines. Prime Minister Modi held bilateral meetings with the US President, with the Bangladesh Prime Minister, and the Mauritius leader yesterday. He met the UK Prime Minister and a host of other leaders also today on the sidelines of the G20 summit. Do you feel that this success of the G20, and as you mentioned, the fact that AU is now a member and there has been the adoption of the Delhi Declaration with consensus, do you feel that this puts India today in a position where it can rightfully claim its position as one of the leading centers of power in the world?
I think you are right, very much so. India has gradually acquired the status of a leading power in the global fraternity, and this India has achieved over the years, starting from 1998, our nuclear tests and India becoming a nuclear weapons power. Now steadily and in the recent years very rapidly, our economic growth. Now we are the fifth largest economic power in the world. And the successes like Chandrayaan, which the whole world watched and applauded India and Indian scientists, and at such a low cost. And also, they noticed, I was looking at the foreign press and foreign TV reports, that there were so many women scientists who contributed to Chandrayaan, and that was absolutely impressive and mesmerizing. And then the world has also seen, all the visitors who come to India, the digital participation by the last person in the society. If they have a small stall selling samosas, they have a QR code. So there are, of course, India is still a developing country. Still, we have a lot of challenges. We have a long way to go. But we have also achieved a lot. And in that growth and development, India wants to be a partner of all the other countries, whether they are developed or developing. And India's acceptance is very high in the global community. As you mentioned, the bilateral meetings are taking place with all the important powers and our important neighbors, very valuable neighbors like Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh. Mauritius has a civilizational affinity with India. So India is steadily rising in the global status, and this successful holding of G20 is a milestone in India's own growth, progress, and prosperity.
Mr. Tyal, as you explained how India's position is rising globally, G20 then has also been a platform where it becomes very evident that we saw Prime Minister Modi having a bilateral with the US President last evening, and there were very important outcomes to the bilateral. We have the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov here in Delhi. He is also in close contact with the Prime Minister. Do you feel that India today is also one of the few countries in the world that has managed relationships with different nations, and that also, one, it lends it's a unique position, and two, it makes it a rightful demand that institutions like, say, the United Nations Security Council need to be changed, and India needs to get a permanent seat on the Security Council?
Very much so. See, the United Nations Security Council has not been able to take any real action or stand on Ukraine issue. But on G20 under India's chairmanship, there has been a consensus para which clearly lays down the principles of how the international conduct should be. So yes, India has achieved a certain status, and India's position since independence has been very principled that we will not align with any particular group. India will act in its own self-interest, but will take the interest of our partners, friends, particularly the developing countries, along when we take any stand. So the way India has been conducting itself, has emerged as a bridge both between North and South. If you think of economic issues, climate change issues, debt relief issues, and also between East and West, if one talks about NATO and Russia. So India is in a unique position. So there is a certain credibility to India's position, India's stand, and what India says. And it is a capital which India has earned over decades by the very principled conduct of its foreign policy.
And in the coming days, we will continue our discussions on the G20 summit and the successful outcomes that we have seen today. With this, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on India's human-centric globalization vision at G20 Summit 2023. Participants were Skand Ranjan Tayal, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani.
नमस्कार। आकाशवाणी की राष्ट्रीय सांस्कृतिक पत्रिका संस्कृति भारती में आपका स्वागत है। मैं हूं मनोज माइंडकर
और मैं हूं नवोदिता मिश्रा।